All right, well, welcome everyone to Calaveras Big Trees State Park. Again, I apologize for the rebooting on my end, but it looks like y'all are still hanging with me, which is awesome. My name is Lily, and I am currently putting that information as my Zoom name. So if you're ever wondering, hey, wait, what's going on here? What's happening? You can refer back to the Zoom name. You'll see, all right, it's Lily. She's at Calaveras Big Trees. And this is a recorded program, so if you have to leave at any point, don't worry, you'll be able to refer back to it. We will put it on the YouTube channel, and we are currently live streaming it now from YouTube as well. And we will be using polls throughout the program here today, so that's why I launched a poll. If you're tuning in to individual devices, you can just vote for yourself. If you're tuning in as a teacher, live streaming it into the classroom, you can just kind of get a group vote and then put it in that way. But I'm going to end the poll now and see who has all been to Calaveras Big Tree State Park. And a strong majority of you has said, nope, I have never been here before. That's totally fair. A number of you, about 21% of you said, yes, I have been there before, welcome back. And for those of you who are like, I'm not sure, there was one of you who said, maybe, I can't remember everywhere you've been. That's fair. So today during the program, we'll be using polls like that one. I will be answering questions at the end. But that being said, I already see a bunch of questions in the Q&A. I'm not checking it until the end. So if you have a question, be strategic and hold on to it. Because first of all, I might be able to answer your question along the way, so you don't even need to ask. But also that way I can see it better at the end versus maybe your question getting swallowed up by 200 or so other questions. Okay, so I will be answering questions, but only at the end. So be strategic about it. Wait until the end. And today's topic is winter superpowers at Calaveras Big Trees. So I'm currently inside our Visitor Center Museum because we have great examples of not only the plants like the giant sequoia, which is why this park is famous, but also the animals that have to deal with the winters we have here. But what are our winters like? Well, let me share my screen here and show you exactly where I am. I pulled up the park on Google Maps. And in a moment, once my screen shares, you will see where I am in the state of California. Now, I don't know where all you are tuning in from. Could be from all over the place. So I have it all zoomed out for you, and then we'll kind of zoom it in to get a bit more specific. Okay? So it says now that you can see my screen. I am in roughly the middle part of California, but I am relatively close to the border of Nevada right there. So let's zoom in a little bit closer so we can see it a little bit better. Again, here's the border of Nevada. Now, because I'm relatively close to the border of Nevada, that means I'm in the mountains that divide our two states. And whenever you're in the mountains, as long as you're up high enough, that means that you're going to get a colder winter than if you were kind of closer to sea level, a little lower to the ground. Higher up you go, the colder it gets. And the reason why I'm here is because that's where the giant sequoias are, the tree that we're going to start talking about before we go into all the animals that live here. The giant sequoia is a very picky tree. It only likes to live in roughly this squiggle right here. That's it. They're not naturally found anywhere else on Earth. They love what's called the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, which is where I am right now. I'm currently at about 5,000 feet up. Not, the highest mountain ever, but still fairly high up. But why are we talking about the giant sequoia specifically before we talk about other living things? Well, as the name suggests, they are very big. Giant sequoia, right? It makes sense. But here's the thing. They are the biggest individual tree to have ever lived, okay? So that means it's definitely bigger than any animals to have ever lived either. So I want you to think of a blue whale or any really big animal you know of. Maybe it's a kind of dinosaur, but think of that really huge animal and now think of 10 of that animal. The heaviest giant sequoia weighs more than 10 blue whales, over 1,000 tons. And 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. So you can do the math there. These are massive, heavy trees. And this overall mass is because they're both tall and they're wide. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you a video that I took just recently. See, there's snow on the ground of a giant sequoia. Starting at the bottom, and now we're going to work our way all the way up to the top. You can see some other trees living with it. They're not growing any taller, but the giant sequoia just keeps on going. All right, these are super tall trees. Now, these aren't the tallest trees ever. That goes to another tree called the coast redwood. They're direct relatives of the giant sequoia. But giant sequoias can also be really wide, much wider than the coast redwood. So here's another video that shows you just how wide these trees can get. This video took a little while ago, so you're not going to see any snow, of what's called the Discovery Stump. And this was the biggest tree in this forest. Unfortunately, way back in 1853, when new settlers came to California and they came across these trees, they decided to cut it down, and now there's just a stump left. But at least we still have a stump so we can see just how big across these trees can get. So right now I'm taking the camera and I'm putting it on one edge of the stump, and I'm going to walk to the other side. And we are on top, me and other me are on top of the same tree, about 25 feet across from each other. Pretty impressive, right? And eventually I'm going to start walking around the tree and go out of frame. Now, the very tallest giant sequoias are 300 feet tall, and the very widest giant sequoias are 40 feet across. Add it all up, include the weight, that's how you get the biggest tree ever. But how can they get so huge? Well, I mean, they got to grow, but they have a very key secret ingredient, and that's time. They have a long time to grow. We eventually stop growing. I mean, if you lived 100 years, that's awesome, that's cause for celebration, but you're going to stop growing long before that. Giant sequoias, they don't stop growing the entire time they're alive, as long as they have everything they need. And they can live and grow for over 3,200 years. Okay? That means the very oldest giant sequoia germinated, I should say, which means it started growing from its seed during the end of the ancient Egyptian Empire. So right before the fall of the pharaohs. And was still living and growing during the entirety of the Romans and the Vikings with their conquests and the horn helmets and all that. The time when paintings were painted and sculptures were carved in Europe, and it's still living and growing today. So that's how they can get to be so huge. They can be incredibly old. And if we could live and grow for over 3,200 years, we would be really big too, right? And I want to tell you that this behind me right here, this is an example of a giant sequoia. You can see it's really big. This is a burn scar, and that's because they can survive all sorts of things, including, not all, but some fires. And including, of course, winters. If you're going to live for 3,000 years, you have to survive over 3,000 winters. And they are not alone in surviving the winters we have here. They have to survive it with all these different animals that also call this place home. All of these are real animals, except for a couple of the snakes. And by that, I mean they used to be alive, but at some point they were found dead, still in pretty good condition. So they were given to someone called a taxidermist. And a taxidermist's job is to preserve these animals and put them in such a form, so like that coyote howling, that they can use museums so people can see, hey, what sort of animals live in this area? So let's get nice and up and close with some of these. I'll introduce you to them. We have porcupines, We have coyotes, like this one right here. We have gray foxes. We don't have any wolves here. That'd be really cool. They're not found in this part of California, potentially yet. Maybe they'll come over here. So these are our closest relatives to wolves. We have birds and squirrels, like these ones hanging out on this tree. And we also have raccoons. You can see one there with some more birds and squirrels. We have bobcats, which are super cool. My coworkers and I saw one about a month ago. I was so excited. I ran out the building, couldn't find it after I left the window, but it was really cool. We have bears. We only have black bears here. You get a little confusing, but black bears don't have to be black. They can be brown, they can be kind of tannish like this cub here. They can be a pretty good variety of kind of earth colors, right? The browns, the blacks, the tans, the kind of rusty color. We do not have any grizzly bears, AKA brown bears in California. It'd be cool if we did. Unfortunately, they were all killed by people. And the last one was killed in the 1920s, so about 100 years ago. So we don't have any of those here, but we do have a bunch of black bears. And I mentioned, of course, snakes. So here's some snakes for you. We have the one that's down here and the one by this quail. That's our state bird. We have skunks. Here's a big old rattlesnake for you. And then we have birds of prey like this owl going after the smaller kind of rodents like this rabbit. And then finally, you might have noticed it before, we do have mountain lions here. All right, now there's no guarantee you're gonna see all these animals here if you visit the park. In fact, it's very unlikely you'll see, for example, a mountain lion. I only know of one coworker who's ever seen a mountain lion in the park. I've never even seen one in the wild before, but still a possibility. And these all have to live, I should say have to live, but all these animals do live here with the giant sequoia and with the other trees that call this park home. So they have to all deal with the winter. And so now I want you to get with your classes and come up with a list of things that these animals and plants have to deal with when it comes to winter. Why is winter such a difficult season? So I want you all to come up with a list together, work on it. I'm going to come up with my own list, and we'll see, hopefully, if they have roughly the same things. And then we're going to go through all the things I have on my list. Now, I won't be able to see your list, unfortunately. There's just too many of you for me to do that. There's 143 of you. It doesn't work very well. But I trust that you're coming up with it together, and I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that, maybe a little less than that while I'm thinking of my list. So again, I want you to think of all the different ways that makes winter such a difficult season. Okay? I'm going to come up with my list. You come up with yours. All right, so you have about 3 more minutes to come up with your list of why is winter such a difficult season. And we're going to go into how these living things I've talked about here deal with it. And they deal with it in different ways. So we're going to get deeper into that, okay? And just so you know, I'm not doing the raised hand function. There's just too many of you to use that, so I'm not paying attention to the raised hand. Sorry, I didn't mention that before. So again, I want you to think of a list of what makes winter such a difficult season. I mean, I'm doing a whole program about winter superpowers, so clearly there must be something that makes winter kind of tricky. And you have about a minute and a half left to think of all the different things, and I'll show you my list. All right, about a minute, a little less than a minute left. So wrap up your thoughts with your group. All right, last few seconds. Now I'm going to show you my list. And it's possible we came up with more because this list looks pretty small, but a lot can go into it. Of course, one issue, animals and plants, any living thing, has to do with the winter is the cold, right? We put on jackets, but these living things can't exactly do that. And related to the cold is snow. Now we get snow here because, like I said, we're in the mountains. Maybe where you are, you don't get snow, but you get rain. It kind of falls under the same issue, right? Weather can be a problem. Maybe put wind, maybe put blizzards. It's all the same idea for snow. And that also ties into shelter. To be able to handle the cold and snow, living things need to have a good sheltered space to stay nice and warm and get out from anything that could, hurt them. Maybe it's a windstorm. There's also less food in the winter. Maybe put something along those lines as well. There's fewer plants that are growing. A lot of them kind of shut down for the winter and be like, I'm good, I'm done. There's no berries. Some insects also go away. So there's just less food overall in the wintertime. There's also one thing that we don't always think about, and that's the lack of sun. There is just less sunlight in the wintertime. The sun rises maybe 7:30, sets at like 4:45. Varies depending on where you are. But if you compare it to the summer, where the sun might rise before 6 a.m. and then set after like 8, that's a lot less sun. The one thing that I want to mention, I put snow on here, but I want to be a little bit more explicit. I'm going to put snow / ice, because you not only have to deal with snow in terms of like the issues that might come your way, maybe it's hard to walk through the snow, but that also means that water is locked up in snow or ice. And just like how we eat snow and ice, we don't drink it. It's the same idea for the living things. They can't drink snow or ice. So the water that you might drink is locked up when it's in this form. So with this list, you can kind of group it into 2 core issues, right? We have everything that's related to it being cold and things relating to the lack of food. So I'm going to do another poll here. I was going through the Q&A just for a little bit to see if people were having issues, and it looks like some people weren't able to see the poll. Hopefully now that I launch it with all of you online, it'll be a little better, and this time I won't crash in the middle. So let's launch the poll, and I want you to tell me, with this grouping, should I talk about lack of food first, or should I talk about how it's so cold first? So go ahead and vote. If you missed it, if you're in a classroom with a bunch of students, you can just kind of get a group to vote and then vote as one. If you're logging in individual devices, go ahead and just do your own vote, okay? I should see a lot of people voting. So we have 142 participants. I want to see a majority of you voting. And the question is, should we talk about lack of food first, or should we talk about the fact that it's really cold first? I'll give you another 30 seconds to vote. All right, another about 15 more seconds to vote. So far, there is one that's clearly a winner that we will talk about first. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And not a huge majority, but a majority of you wants to talk about lack of food first. 65% of you said, let's talk about that. Don't worry though, for you cold people, we will be talking about the cold after. So let's get in on that, shall we? Lack of food, that's on here. The bear, I think, is a classic example for how a living thing can deal with a lack of food. It has some really cool adaptations for it. And that's what we're talking about for the rest of the program. Adaptations are basically the superpowers I mentioned before. They're any sort of characteristic or trait, whether it's hibernation for a bear, that's a behavior, whether it's something permanent like fur, anything like that that helps any living thing survive, so live day to day, and hopefully even thrive, so do really well in their environment. And a bear's adaptation is that hibernation I just mentioned. And hibernation is when they say, you know what? There's hardly any food here. I love to eat ants, I love to eat berries, and neither of those are around right now. So I'm just gonna sleep. And I'm going to sleep throughout the winter months. Not only does that help them not worry about the lack of food, but it helps them not worry about the cold and the snow and all that. They'll find some sort of nice, cozy shelter. It's not always a cave. Sometimes it's something as simple as a fallen tree. But they'll find a little spot for them and they will sleep under there for however long it takes to wait out winter and not have to worry about it. But they do have to do some prep in order to do that. They can't just say, okay, I'm good, and they sleep for 2 months. They have to prepare because they have to have food around. Maybe you've gone to bed after dinner and then you've woken up hungry for breakfast. Your body's been using up food even as you sleep. So bears have to store food in order to sleep for however many months. And they do that by getting super, super fat. So this picture that you'll see in a moment here, this is from actually Katmai National Park in Alaska. And these aren't black bears, these are brown bears. But I think it's really cool, so I shared anyway. This is from something called Fat Bear Week. They host it every October, right when the bears are getting their fattest before hibernating for the winter. And this bear, for example, this is the same bear, only about 2 months later. Look at how fat it's gotten. It's gorged on however much food it can find during the summer and fall when there's enough food around to get super fat, such that it can afford to sleep for however many months. If it didn't do that, the bears wouldn't be able to make it by hibernating. They could starve, and that would be really bad. So they have to get as fat as possible to hibernate. And they have a couple other pretty cool adaptations just to be able to hibernate. And one of them is pretty gross. So feel free to share this as a fun fact later today with your folks. When bears hibernate, they don't do anything. By that, I mean, they don't use the bathroom either, okay? So they hold it the whole time. And not only that, but they know there's not much water outside. So a lot of the water is stored in the fat. But let's say they don't have enough water in the fat. Well, they haven't peed in a long time. So their body can actually go into their bladder and reuse the water if they're getting dehydrated. That's a whole other thing that we can't do, but bears have that adaptation so they can hibernate and they don't need to worry about the lack of food and the cold and all that. So that's pretty unique. None of the other living things here can do that. And that's something bears are really well known for. But other living things still have to deal with the lack of food, including even the giant sequoias. Giant sequoias stick around for the wintertime. I mean, obviously they can't go anywhere, but they don't shut down. Some trees, they lose their leaves and they kind of shut down for winter. Giant sequoia stays year round. Their leaves are considered evergreen. That's what it means when they're around year round. And they look like needles, or I should say, are needles. So these little things right here, these are giant sequoia needles that I found on the ground earlier. See, they're kind of skinny, kind of green, almost looks like I came from a bush. And you'll see these no matter what time of year. So they have to be able to deal with the lack of food too. I'll be wondering, what do you mean they have to deal with lack of food? Plants make their own food. But think about how they make their own food. To do that, they need air, specifically the carbon dioxide we breathe out. They need sun, and they need water. Air is not on this list, but guess what? Lack of sun is, and snow is snow/ice. So there are two key ingredients needed for making their own food that aren't around as much in the winter as they are other times of year. So they have to plan ahead. Giant sequoia, it's kind of like how a bear eats food when it's there, it gets really fat. They will make their food, they make it in the form of sugar, when there's water and sun around, and store it in their roots under the ground. And in the wintertime, if let's say there's a really not sunshiny day and it's super cold, so there's no water flowing around, they will use that food from their roots. They'll use that sugar from their roots, and that's how they survive the wintertime. It's actually kind of similar, because underground, to what squirrels and some birds do, right? Squirrels are a classic example of storing food, often where you don't want them to store. Maybe you've been in a park before with a big grassy lawn and a bunch of little like saplings growing because the squirrels have been burying lots of seeds. They're really well known for that. And some birds do something similar. This is an acorn woodpecker, and they make all sorts of holes in the trees and then fill the holes with acorns. That's the name acorn woodpecker. So all these different living things deal with the lack of food by preparing and storing ahead of time. The bears do it by getting really fat. The giant sequoia does it by storing food in the roots under the ground. And of course, lots of birds and squirrels do it by storing food also under the ground like a giant sequoia, or in a tree like the acorn woodpecker. So that crosses the whole food concept off of our list. But of course, you still have to deal with the cold and the snow, and like, where's your shelter gonna be, right? Well, we talked about how bears deal with that by finding a nice kind of fallen log. What some animals do, they take advantage of the snow. If you've ever been to the snow before, you may know that it's very easy to build with snow. Not all snow, but some snow is pretty sticky. So you can build a snowman or a snowball, or maybe even a snow fort or an igloo like the Eskimos. You can create a shelter with the snow. And some squirrels and other little rodents do that. They will tunnel under the snow and build little shelters using the snow, which could be a problem, but instead use it to make a nice, warm, cozy shelter. So they don't have to worry about the cold so much. They can stay nice and cozy and warm. But let's say that you don't really want to stay in the snow. Maybe instead what you want to do is hang out instead inside a tree. Well, the nice thing is giant sequoias are a pretty cozy home for some animals. They have really nice bark. This is the bark of a giant sequoia. You can see this kind of nice reddish color. They are considered part of the redwood family. So if you know of coast redwoods, they're direct relatives of coast redwoods. And it's really nice, soft, fuzzy bark. I'm not getting splinters by stroking it like this. Kind of see a little bit of fuzz on the tip there. And because it's super nice and soft, that means it's actually really warm. It helps keep the giant sequoias warm. That's really key. Trees can get cold too. And since they don't shut down for the winter, like I mentioned, they have to have something to handle the cold. But this warm fuzz also means that they can be nice homes for animals like birds and squirrels. They will make little holes in the trees and then hang out inside the giant sequoia during the winter time. And the giant sequoia, for the most part, it doesn't really hurt them too much because they can have really thick bark. The thickest part of a giant sequoia's bark can be 2 feet. 2 feet thick. Okay, that's the length of my arm. Now it's plenty of space for any little critters that might want to hang out inside and stay nice and cozy warm. So we've kind of covered this list pretty well, right? The giant sequoia has nice warm bark that helps it survive the cold. Other living things can use that. And other living things can also actually use the snow to their advantage and build their own homes. So I want to ask you, out of all the different animals I just talked about, there are a couple that are a little bit different. Okay? So actually, I'm not going to ask this to you. I'm going to ask this to you later. There are a couple that do things a little bit differently compared to the other ones. One is the rabbit, okay? They have cozy shelters. They have all that, but they do something a little bit extra. And some other small mammals do it too. They change their fur. Because right now, the fur is brown and the ground is brown, so they blend in pretty well. But if the ground is white because there's snow, talk about snow a lot, then that's going to be an issue. The owl can very clearly see the rabbit. So the rabbit will shed its fur when winter is coming, and they know that because there's less sun in the sky, right? We said that before. They will shed their fur and then grow new fur that's a white color that blends in better with the snow. So that's kind of tied in with the whole snow problem, but they're not, storing food specifically. They're not trying to avoid the cold specifically. They're doing this to try to stay alive from predators who can now see them better if they don't change their fur color. So that's something that's a little bit unique. And many times, a couple other animals do this. When they shed their fur, shed their summer coat, we call it, and then grow this new one, it's also a fair amount warmer. So they can stay nice and cozy. And then when the sun starts coming back more and more, it's a sign that spring's coming, they will shed this coat and then grow a new summer one that's a different color. That's one thing that's different. But let's say you don't want to have to deal with this at all. You're like, forget this. I hate winter. I don't want to have to worry about it. Well, maybe what you're going to do is migrate. And you're going to get out of here. And we have some birds that do that. Maybe you know about migration from insects like the monarch butterfly. It's a very famous example. The idea of migration is if you were on the upper part of that little line I just drew there, roughly, it's winter. But if you're underneath that line, it's summer. So what some birds and insects, whales, lots of animals can do this. What they do is they continually travel throughout the year, so they always are in at least a summertime-like season. They'll go from like here in California down South America area maybe, and then come on back up whenever that season turns to winter. So they can continually get at the summer. And they have different adaptations to handle that. Some birds can turn off half of their brain while they're flying, so they can put that half to sleep basically, and then switch and turn off the other half of their brain so they can keep flying for days and days and days and not get tired. There's all sorts of cool stuff that's a part of just not even bothering with wintertime. But then there's another animal, another group of animals, honestly, that does things even more differently. And that's because they're just different overall. Those are the cold-blooded animals. These are the snakes and lizards and any sort of amphibian like a frog or a toad. These guys are cold-blooded, which means that when it's cold outside, their inside temperature is cold. When it's warm outside, their inside temperature is warm. We're warm-blooded. We're always warm inside. That means that we can do whatever we want, kind of whenever we want. We might sweat. We might get some like chills, like get goosebumps if we're too cold. But in general, we're good no matter what the temperature is, as long as it's not too extreme. These guys aren't like that. If it gets below about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, they kind of shut down. Their insides are like, no, we can't really function. So they go into their version of hibernating. But here's the thing, they don't have to plan ahead of time like the bear does, because they don't need to eat all the time. We have to constantly eat because we have to always add fuel to our inside fire to keep ourselves warm. Constantly eating just because we're warm-blooded. Cold-blooded animals, they don't have to keep eating all the time. On a normal, month, a snake might eat once every 2 weeks, once a week, and they'll be okay with that because they don't have to keep adding fuel to their inside fire. So in the wintertime, it's okay if they don't eat for a few months. They'll just find a nice little hidey hole somewhere nice and secure so they don't get, eaten by something, and then just stay there and wait it out. And it's not found here, but it's really cool. You'll notice I do that a couple times. There's a frog called the wood frog. It's found again in Alaska. And it can literally freeze in a block of ice, be frozen for months, and then thaw out and be okay. So scientists are looking at that frog and being like, how do you do this? And how could maybe we do this for humans, for maybe someone who really needs a specific kind of medicine, but they can't have it yet? Or maybe for like space travel? Who knows? But it's an example of a really cool adaptation that maybe we in the future can use. So we've talked about a lot of different adaptations for a lot of different kinds of animals and the giant sequoia, of course. So I want to ask you now, what was your favorite adaptation, or you can call it a superpower? So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll here. Do you really like hibernation? Do you want to grow slightly warmer, but that different colored fur, like the rabbit? Do you want to store food under the ground, like the trees or the squirrels? Do you want to migrate and just say, forget this, I'm going to be eternally in the summer. I have to, fly a lot to do that or swim a lot to do that. Or do you want to be cold-blooded and be completely different from everything? And if you're a wood frog, maybe just freeze in a block of ice. Which is your favorite? And while you're voting, I'm going to take us a little peek outside so you can see the snow. I can't go very far because otherwise I'll lose internet connection. I don't want to lose you like I did in the very beginning. So I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see it. And also while you're voting, since we're coming to the end of our time together, I'm going to look through the questions in the Q&A. So if you've been waiting patiently to put in your question in the Q&A, go ahead and do that now, okay? All right, so I see a couple questions about the bears. Someone asked, why did people kill the bears? I'm guessing you're asking about the grizzly bears. They killed them because initially it was a good food source. They were so big, it was a lot of food. And then people killed them because they were a top predator and they thought that they would threaten people's livestock, so like sheep and cows, and people were just kind of scared of them and didn't like them and they wanted them for trophies. So they killed all of them. Very similar happened to wolves. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have many wolves in California. We have some, but that's just because some came from elsewhere in the United States and came down here. All right, let's answer some more questions. Thank you all still for voting. I'll give you another maybe 30 seconds to vote. Do you want to hibernate, have different colored fur, store food, migrate, or be cold-blooded? Which do you prefer? All right, I see questions about how do bears stop hibernating? They kind of wake up on their own time, usually when it gets a little warmer, maybe when they're like, shoot, I need more food, and emerge out of it that way. Sometimes they do it not on purpose. So something interrupts their slumber, and that can kind of throw them for a loop, make them a little bit confused about what's going on. Someone asked about how old the trees are. 3,200 years old is the oldest giant sequoia. The oldest tree overall is a tree called the Briscone pine. That's over 5,000 years old. All right, I'm not seeing a bunch of questions. I'm seeing some comments. Someone asked about other frogs. What do other frogs do? Some frogs go elsewhere. They do like mini migrations. So they don't have to worry about the snow. Others, they go underground where it's not quite so cold. But I'm now going to end the poll and share the results. Not a ton of you voted, but there was a slim majority of people who wanted to be cold-blooded out of everything else. I like that answer. I think cold-blooded animals are cool, so I appreciate that you thought the same. And then some of you, kind of an even split throughout the rest of it. Some of you thought, I want to migrate, not even have to worry about it. Some of you want to hibernate. I mean, who doesn't really want to sleep for a really long time, right? And some of you also want to grow different colored fur. The storage is not super popular. I don't blame you. That's kind of something we do already, right? Someone in the Q&A mentioned fridges and freezers, maybe canning foods. We do something pretty similar. Thank you all for voting. I'll answer a few more questions. And then the program was supposed to end about 5 minutes ago, but because I had issues in the beginning, I'm going over just a little bit. So I'm just going to answer a few more questions. And again, this program is being recorded. So if you missed a part of it, if it came in late, it will be posted online for you to watch it later. Someone asked if there's spiders here. Yes, we have spiders and insects. Don't have any examples in the museum because we don't have any like pinned collections, which is often how museums show insects and spiders, but we do have some here. Usually those guys, they're around in the winter time. Lots of insects, or the spiders around the winter time, I should say. Some insects leave, they migrate. Some insects live underground, kind of like how some frogs do it. And some, they don't hibernate per se, but they're not alive in the winter. They lay eggs, the eggs don't hatch, the whole winter goes through, and then the eggs hatch in the spring. So they're only really around spring through maybe the fall. I have a question about polar bears. We do not have any polar bears here. We only have black bears. We used to have grizzly bears. Most of California used to have grizzly bears, but as I mentioned before, they were all killed, unfortunately. And I'll answer one last question about, wait a minute, what's going on with the birds turning off half of their brain? So someone asked, if birds turn off half the brain when some of their other bipods do not respond. Great question. It's part of that weird adaptation where they can afford to just sleep with half their brain. But it's like how when you're asleep, you can still like breathe and like maybe twitch or something. They're able to still function okay when they are half asleep. And the other half is awake, so they can still be alert enough to like avoid a tree or something like that. All right. So thank you all so much for joining me and for asking questions and participating in the poll. I hope you learned a little something about the winter time here. You can see we got some snow on the ground. It's a fairly cold day today. And I do want to give a really quick plug to something new this year that's called, or last year technically, that's called the California State Parks Library Pass. This is a free pass that you can check out at your local library. As long as you have a library card, you're good. And it'll get you into pretty much any state park you want for free. Most state parks charge you a little something. This park, for example, charges $10. But if you go to your local library first and check out the pass, you can then enter for free. So do that before you visit a state park. Please do visit a state park. You might learn a little something like you did here, maybe learn about some history, maybe you'll learn about how the government works. You visit, for example, the Capitol. I hope you all stay curious, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. This will be posted on the California State Parks Ports YouTube page, so you can look that up. It'll be called, just as the program is called, Winter Superpowers at Calaveras Big Trees State